And welcome back to the discussion Cyber Challenges in Defense and Evolving Missions, sponsored by Tenable Public Sector on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guest today is Chris Cleary, the Director of Business Development and Federal Cybersecurity Strategy for Tenable Public Sector. And I'm your moderator, Scott Massioni. We were talking before about the cyber mission teams that DoD has set up. First of all, can you give us a little bit of a reminder as to what the cyber mission teams do, what their whole purpose is for DoD?
Yeah, so back in 2010, when U.S. Cybercom was established, it realized that it was going to need a force to do all the missions that it was directed, to do. So the idea was setting up this, what they called the National Mission Force, which is, 133 mission teams that all are sort of have different flavors, everything from defending the Department of Defense networks to sending teams specifically to go support combatant commanders, EUCOM, NORTHCOM, CENTCOM, to the kind of missions that they would be doing forward. The trick was, as the services were tasked with sort of man training and equipping. At the end of the day, that's what the services do. Come up with the manning, figure out how to train those guys, and then give them the capability they need to take forward to do their mission. So the manning came around. We've got the 6,100 members of the National Mission Team and the 133 teams. The training is coming online, and for the most part, that's got pretty standardized. But the tool set that they're using is still something that I don't know if they've completely figured out how to equip the end user. As an example, for the military, we use a rifle as an analogy.
Right.
There's not a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, officer, or enlisted that has not touched what we all kind of identify as the M16 rifle. Everybody who wears a uniform is fundamentally familiar with how that thing works. Now, some guys just use it once a year to show proficiency. Other guys go to professionalize on it and spend an entire career mastering it. Think Special Forces groups, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Delta Force. The cyber mission force is kind of trying to figure out their same way of doing business. And I believe that those sort of fundamental capabilities that these guys are going to, be introduced to, and everybody from an officer and enlisted that has some familiarization with certain kinds of capabilities, but other guys are going to professionalize on that, over a career. Again, bringing it back to sort of the ACAS program, and one of the things that Tenable does is, as we provide that fundamental cornerstone of capability, we have seen those things begin to proliferate into other organizations. They definitely support the defensive mission from a compliance standpoint and things, but we have begun to see certain components of capability find their ways into cyber protection teams or cyber mission teams. And it's the continuing of that that will allow guys, again, to professionalize over a career, over tools that are not going to disappear tomorrow.
And yeah, I mean, what kind of tools do they? Because, we always think of military as holding the rifle, things like that. And cyber warfare is so kind of abstract. It's hard to think about what it actually is. You kind of think of the 1980s movie with the Russians and the U.S., right? So, what are we looking at when we see a cyber warrior go and actually do a fight or a mission or something like that?
Yeah, again, I've been out of the game for a little bit, so
Sure.
I don't want to speak to that. I'm sure there's some guys that are much better versed in that. But when we look at the kinds of fundamental capabilities that you would need, the military sort of breaks down the way that it does business into four basic kind of functions. There's an offensive component. There's a defensive component. There's a thing they called ISR, or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And then there's another thing they call cyber OPE, or operational preparation of the environment. Companies like Tenable, we don't particularly play in the offensive or defensive world. That's not our space. But we do fit very nicely into things that are, the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or the operational preparation of the environment. How does the warfighter be given a capability that allows them to understand the environment that they have to go operate in? We have our Nessus scanner as an example. It's been around since 2008, I believe. That is the fundamental and probably most widely deployed scanner on the planet, and something that anybody who's in this space, whether they're civilian, a student, just learning how to do network security, has been fundamentally familiar with.
Right.
And as those guys transition from, let's say, civilian environments into the military, or vice versa, there is something to be said for seeing that capability already deployed there. So there is a cost reduction in training because the tool's there, and it's something they've probably seen in a lot of other ways. And it's just they might learn to use it a little bit differently based on the mission.
Now, when Tenable's developing a system or a weapon or whatever, are you trying to stay ahead of the Defense Department and trying to figure out what they may need, or are you waiting for the requirement, or doing a little bit of both?
So that's a double-edged
Sure.
sword. So we'll stay away from the word weapon,
Right.
because that's not our space. But there are components to weapon systems. Radars that go on airplanes are components of weapon systems, but they're not weapons themselves. So I guess the idea of any good industry is to either anticipate where the government's going and try to get there, or encourage the government to go to certain areas. So from a business development standpoint, we obviously are trying to get the government to go to certain areas. So for instance, our cyber exposure for our new platform that basically we believe we're the first to come out with a tool that can really help you understand your exposure to the environment, and not to get all sales pitchy, but we are trying to anticipate where the industry needs to go, especially with the explosion of operational technology, industrial control systems. We believe that we're positioning ourselves to be a better provider of that capability. But conversely, a lot of times the government's going to have things they specifically want, so those requirements come to us. And then, like any good business, we make business decisions, whether those are requirements that we want to sort of build into our capability, to which point we can then deliver back to the government.
Right. And what about commercial tools that are already out there for cybersecurity? How are you giving those to DoD?
Again, one of my favorite topics. I used to say that creating cyber capability is not like you're refining uranium, right? Anybody with a computer and some code, skills can write code and create capability. Now, there's something to be said for the government. It has money, they have access. They have particular training. They can scale, but the fundamental things that are being done are just being done on a keyboard. So, commercial industry is very well positioned to support that capability. And in most instances, what you found is that a lot of commercial capability is being repurposed, just bought off the shelf, COTS equipment, and being rolled into capability that it sometimes gets positioned as a weapon system within some of these services. Tenable has found ourselves in some of those capabilities.
Congress recently made it easier for private industry to share some of their virus detectability and things like that, things that they'll see, their schematics, with DoD and with just the government writ large. How is that helping you develop tools and hear maybe what DoD wants from the cybersecurity it's looking for?
One of the fundamental problems that I think the government and DoD or nobody's really solved is the complete visibility into your infrastructure.
Yeah.
And again, I'll go back to the things. The explosion of additional devices that you're finding in your infrastructure is only exacerbating the problem. It becomes harder and harder. So it's this continuous, never-ending game of trying to understand what's on your network, and then what vulnerabilities or risks being introduced with those devices on your network based on the way an adversary might want to go after them. Tenable has been positioning themselves for the better part of a decade to understand that environment and do it pretty well. And because it's our business, it's our bread and butter. And not only do we do business with the federal government, but we have a very large commercial base that we support. It's in our best interest to always make sure that our capability is leading edge, not just for what we provide to the government, but what we provide to the commercial space. And in some instances, the commercial space drives the technology development. It's not always the DoD or the federal government that drives it. I think what you find in this space in particular is the commercial industry has really driven a lot of the things that the DoD has gone to acquire and roll into their operations, whether it be information technology or what we consider traditional military operations, because we're good at it. The commercial industry is good at providing capability. That's our bread and butter.
Yeah, I think when it comes to cyber, the DoD has been used since the 60s and 70s and even 80s of being at the forefront, right, of technology and things like that. It seems like now in the 21st century, it's now Apple and Google and that's
very much so.
Things,
I mean,
right?
if you look at the things that radar, sonar, Velcro, those are all things that were sort of developed by the federal government to support mission that then found commercial applications. Mm-hmm. It's just the opposite now. Because of the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts and the Tenables, we are continuing to create capability, advancing the art of the possible in technology that is now outpacing some of the things that are being done in the federal government, and they're finding the need to have to come to us to help them advance their own missions.
Now, I wanted to move back to the cyber mission forces we were talking about before, and do you think that because this goes along with what we're saying, there needs to be a standardization throughout these teams, and also there's some of them are National Guard, some of them are Air Force, some of them are Navy. They don't always talk well together. So can private industry be that connective tissue at times, and where can they
Yeah, so
together?
that again, I'm a huge advocate of this, and there are some things that I think are going to be fundamental to the way all cyber units do their mission. But Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, everybody likes to do things a little bit differently. Some guys are going to have different kit, right? Some guys going to like one tool over another, and the Army may choose to standardize on a particular capability, and the Navy may choose to standardize on another. But fundamentally, those capabilities will provide the same function. The trick is, how do you continue to encourage the standardization and acknowledge that there are some tools that will survive decades? Yeah. And traditionally, when you look at the IT space, we have been guilty for in some instances continuing to throw capability over the fence. It's the shiny new thing, so everybody wants the new thing, and by the time that they've just almost got to understand the old thing, there's something new that we're presented with. So they've got to learn the whole process all over again. There are some capabilities out there. I'll leverage the Nessus scanner as an example. The Nessus scanner has been around for 10 years. It's going to be around for another 10 years. There are certain things that the government can say, hey, you know what? I can begin to fundamentally standardize on that because it's going to be around. It's not going to go away. It's not something I'm going to have to worry about replacing tomorrow.
Great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure talking to you. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Cyber Challenges in Defense and the Evolving Mission. I'd once again like to thank our guest, Chris Cleary, Director of Business Development and Federal Cyber Strategy at Tenable Public Sector, and thank Tenable for sponsoring this program. I'm Scott Massioni on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search Detail on Defense.